Okay, welcome to episode 3 of the Ghost Panther podcast. And today there's a lot of cool ghost stuff that I want to talk about, and I'm excited to talk about it. This is going to be really weird, but that's cool with me. So let's start off with a ghost story. I like to tell ghost stories that are like non traditional, that aren't necessarily like creepy ghost stories, but like fascinating. So here's kind of a different side of ghosts that I think is fascinating. This is a book called I See Dead People: How I Learned to Help Earthbound Spirits. Okay. This is a woman who claims to have psychic abilities, and she is able to kind of tune into ghosts and like understand. Not only does she say that she sees them, but she understands kind of their background, and she can tune into them and communicate with them. So here it is. A young woman was sitting in the back seat of our car behind John, that's her husband. She was as real to me as anything else. She wore very large, thick glasses, as well as a winter hat and jacket. She was also wearing her seatbelt. That's interesting. I wonder if her husband would have turned around if he would have seen like a seatbelt floating there. Her hands were quietly folded on her lap, and she just sat there. I don't know if she saw me or not, but that didn't really make a difference to me. There was a dead person riding in the car with us. I couldn't bear the weight of the fact alone. After turning around several times to make sure she was really there and not going away, I blurted out to John that there was indeed someone riding in the back seat. John became very excited. Her husband was into ghosts, as expected. And as expected, wanted to speak with her. I was nowhere near ready to engage. So this is interesting because this woman says that, this is a terrifying, she felt a presence in the back seat. She didn't want to turn around. She was terrified. And at no point during this whole thing did she say that the ghost that was supposedly in the back seat was like menacing or dark or evil or foreboding, but she was terrified. In fact, later. She talks about how this person was very peaceful and respectful and kind. There was nothing at all negative about this person, but just the just the presence of an entity is just horrifying for people. And I think that sometimes, this is just my personal opinion, people actually construe that as darkness or malevolence or bad intent or ill will, or they construe it as not being safe, being in danger, when in reality it's just a fear response, and the entity is like perfectly, you know, kind and good-willed and good-natured. So that's just a side note. Okay. I was still hoping that she would disappear somehow. Finally, he agreed to give me some time to adjust and come to terms with what I was seeing. Now, what he would do was whenever she still like was horrified when ghosts would come around, this ability that she claimed to have was like waking up. Now, I'm starting to believe in these types of abilities, and it's really just experiences that I've had over the past like 3 or 4 years that have started to make me think, yeah, I can see something like this being real. But this was in the beginning of her story, and she really hadn't come to terms with it yet. Luckily, her husband was very supportive, and she would kind of connect to a ghost or a spirit that came by, and then he would record whatever she said, whatever she like channeled from this spirit. So that's interesting. Okay. We arrived home shortly after, and to my great despair, she was still following us, walking a few feet behind us after we left the car. Clutching John's arm, I whispered to him that she was still following us. I started racing and told John that I wanted to lose her. How silly of me. As soon as John made it through the door, I slammed it shut and locked it, leaving the woman stranded on the porch. As we were taking off our jackets, he asked me if she was still with us. I said that she was just outside the front door. We had been home for only a few minutes when some of the fear started to ease off and I could think again. To my surprise, I started feeling guilty for having locked out our visitor. I was wondering wasn't just coming through the door. Then the answer just dawned on me. It was out of respect, obviously. She knew that I was scared and that I did not want her in our house, so she decided to wait outside. With that realization, I went to the front door, unlocked it, and opened it and invited her in. I felt like such a fool. To anyone else watching this, I was talking to myself, and I can only imagine what I looked like. I then offered to take off her jacket, or I then offered to take her jacket and invited her to take a seat on the living room sofa, which she did. That's interesting. John was watching me closely, not at all surprised or fazed by this, because they had been trying to do this a couple times already. Weird things were part of our life together. I explained to John that out of respect for me, she had been waiting to be invited in, and that her name was Beatrice. Beatrice. I told him that I felt really bad for leaving her outside, and that she seemed very nice. Let's see what I said. With my fear subsiding, I also realized that if she had followed us all the way home, she must have really wanted our help. In a flash, John was setting up the tape recorder. Da, da, da. It's interesting. Now, I personally don't know if this particular story is true, but I think it's interesting to explore. It's okay to explore and kind of remain skeptical the whole time. But I think it's interesting because people talk about astral projecting as well. And there was another story that I just heard where a guy was astral projecting. By the way, if you have astral projection experiences or stories or weird ghost stories, email them to ghostpantherpodcast@gmail.com because I'm really into this stuff. I think ghost stories are cool. I think all ghost stories are cool. I've heard enough creepy, scary, foreboding, haunting ghost stories. To me, that stuff is boring. Like if it's creepy and if it's a monster and if it's standing at your bed and you're terrified and everything, that's a valid experience. But I just feel like there's so much more to what a ghost is. There's so many more layers that there's a whole nother side that I think needs to be explored and discussed. Anyway, so this guy was astral projecting into his own street in front of his house. Now, the interesting thing is that this guy was he would go into a version of the street. It was like a spirit world version, not exactly like normal reality. It was like an overlay, and he would see people walking around. And the interesting thing is he describes different types of people having different conscious experiences. Some people were frantic and stressed and repetitive, and they were going through cycles. Other people were lost, asking for directions, help me get home, typical ghost stuff, help me find my car, or I want to get home. And other people were more conscious. They'd come up to him and they'd say, hey, you can see me. I would like help. Da, da, da. And other people, he said, were also astral projecting and they just weren't aware of it. They were dreaming and they were out of their body. So I just think there's interesting things to explore. Again, I haven't experienced astral projection. I would love to. I think that's the coolest stuff ever. But yeah, I haven't experienced that myself. Okay, so let's move on to the next story. It's interesting too. I just want to say this. A lot of ghosts, it seems, are actually just scared of death. It seems like that is such a common theme. And it seems contradictory. How could a ghost be afraid of death? And I think if you imagine suddenly your body dies somehow, you get in an accident or there was a fire or a fight or something, and suddenly you're outside of your body and you're not willing to disconnect from the narrative. And especially perhaps you do realize that your body is dead, but you have some sort of fundamentalist Christian mindset. You think you're going to be punished, which apparently a lot of ghosts don't transition because they think they're going to be punished. So there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of deconstruction that happens. And my personal theory is that if someone's consciousness is outside of their body and their body is now dead, and they have to come to terms with that in their own way. Um, I think that they probably deconstruct and learn faster than they would in their body. I think that, I mean, this is getting like really woo woo spiritual stuff. I don't care. I don't care about getting really spiritual. Um, it just makes sense to me that it was probably part of their life plan that they agreed to before like this incarnation. That they would spend so much time being a physical human, and then they'd spend so much time being a ghost, because there were those two experiences offered different types of conscious growth, but they came to an end. Like both experiences would come to an end, and you'd transition from a ghost finally into, you'd fully embrace death, which means that you'd like disconnect from the space and from the narratives and the beliefs and the stuff that were holding you back. So there's probably a lot of deconstruction that's a little bit easier to do once you're out of your body. I think this is really important to talk about, because in my old religion, they taught that it was exactly the opposite. Now, I'm no longer a Christian or I'm not religious at all, but they used to say that it was a lot easier to repent and change bad habits in your body. And if you tried to do it outside of your body, it was like grueling and it took long. I just don't believe that. I just don't believe that. It seems that from all of the near-death experiences that I've researched, it just seems that once people are out of their body, they actually see clearer. And it's easy for them to say, okay, I can see now how that belief system is harming me. I can see how I was seeing things wrong, or I could see the delusions that I was involved with. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents. Okay. I was going to read a story about my dad breaking his back, falling out of a tree. I'll share it next time, because I'm already, wow, this is only 12 minutes long. Okay. Well, this is a long form podcast, so maybe I will share the NDE from my dad. Okay. I'm going to read it. Here it goes. All right, looking at my iPad. I'm trying to do as little editing as possible, so I'm probably not going to edit this out. Okay, my dad breaks his back. Here's what he wrote me in an email. In the late summer or early fall of 1968, I was invited to a family picnic in Big Cottonwood Canyon in Utah. I was dating a girl named Pam Barrett. Her family and I were enjoying ourselves by taking turns throwing a toy boomerang. I threw it and it went into a pine tree, about 35 or 40 feet up. There were several trees growing in very close together. I think aspen and pine. I climbed the pine and I thought it had landed in, and I looked but could not discover the toy. I shook the tree really hard, trying to dislodge the boomerang, but it never fell out. I decided to cross over to the aspen that was close and intermingled with the tree. as I held on to a branch in the aspen. Now, this is when he's near the very top of the tree, like he said, 40 feet up. I once again shook the tree really hard, and this is not a good, he did this while he was transitioning. And the branch I was holding broke off. I fell 40 feet, striking many of the limbs on the way down. As the branch broke off, I immediately thought to myself, God, here I come. It's completely over. I am a dead man. I truly thought I was going to die, so I just relaxed intuitively. At that moment, my spirit pulled out of my body and time stopped, and in slow motion, but perfect clarity, I watched my body fall down, hitting branches on the way down. Now, this is like surreal. Hearing him tell this is really surreal, because he could see with perfect clarity, and it was like a hyper real experience being out of his body. There's something about being convinced, psychologically, like convinced that you're going to die. The same thing happened to a guy in Egypt during a traffic accident. He just thought, okay, yeah, definitely this is the end. I'm going to die, because it was like a pile up and cars were spinning, and he's like, it's over. Same thing with him. He came out of his body and he watched all of this stuff happened. It was like in slow motion. Um, my dad didn't say that he had a life review or anything, but he had perfect peace and perfect clarity while he was out of his body. Now, an interesting thing that happened to him, I'll get back to quoting him, but he doesn't write this part down. Um, while his body was slamming through the branches on the way down, his glasses got ripped off of his face on top of one of the branches. So, and it was like in the middle of the tree, completely out of view of everybody. Okay. And he wouldn't, he hit it, he hit the branch backwards, and he would have not known, like his eyes would not have known that his glasses were in this specific area. But he did know where the glasses were because his spirit, like I said, was seeing every detail in slow motion with perfect clarity. And so he ends up, okay, let me just hop back in real quick. Okay. My spirit left my body. Just before my body hit the ground, I decided to get back into my body. So that's interesting. So he slipped back in right before impact. The impact left me numb, but still conscious. I had landed on my butt with my legs spread in front of me just enough that they missed this huge boulder right in front of me. So there was a boulder right between his legs. He landed right behind it. That is extremely lucky. Uh-oh, I lost my place. Okay. I remember my face coming very close to that rock. Oh, geez. As I reclined back, I was caught on either side by my shoulders by the roots of the pine tree that were shaped in kind of a V. You know how those big roots come off the pine trees? So he's sitting between two of these roots. They caught him under the armpits. The doctor later told me that if I had laid back, that shattered bone in my spine would have severed my spinal cord, making me a paraplegic. So my dad broke his back. He shattered 2 vertebrae. And he lost an inch off of his height. And he always kind of like had this weird kind of walk after this, by the way. I remember I was in no pain, but felt numb. Pam and her little brother rushed over to me, as did her parents and many others in the picnic ground. Some people offered me a cigarette, which I declined. They asked me if I could feel my legs. I could, but my whole body was very numb and buzzing for a long time. Now, he also, and this is something that he also didn't include in the email, but he told me that people felt strongly, like I would say there was like a strong impression that everybody collectively had that they should not move him at all. And that was very, very smart. Like nobody moved him. Nobody tried to lay him down. They called the ambulance. They loaded me into the ambulance in the same sitting position. Going down the canyon was very painful. Pam stayed with me the whole time to the nearest emergency hospital. Once there, I begged the doctor to put me out, but they had to do an x-ray and sign a release. Pam's father was going to sign the release. Anyway, blah, 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 blah. I stayed in the hospital for 3 weeks, I believe. I received my mission call, he's LDS, to Japan while I was in the hospital. Pam came repeatedly while I was there. If somebody broke their back these days, they would never go on a mission. So that's interesting. Cool story. Cool story. If you have an out-of-body experience or a near-death experience or some type of weird astral experience, again, email it in to ghostpantherpodcast@gmail.com. Okay, let's get into some alien abductions. Now, I want to play, there's this podcaster that I'm obsessed with. His name is Simon Bown. He's an English guy. I think he's from South London. I love his podcasts. He has several of them. He's a very spiritual dude. He actually is like a hypnotist, and he regresses people. So he has, he's thoroughly in the world of paranormal stuff. And I want to play a couple audio clips from his podcast. They're just short, little, tiny audio clips that I'm going to give commentary on because they're so amazing. But first, let's share some stories, and then let's get into some really weird alien stuff. So first, Finland, 1917. Okay, so let's go into the notes and I want to read this story to you. Okay. Annie Latu, I'm going to say Latu, I don't know how to pronounce her name. Annie Latu tells a story from the time just before Finland declared independence, right around 1917. Annie disappeared for some days, and the villagers thought she had gone to visit her daughter. But when she came back, she had an amazing story to tell. A large machine, like a big wash basin, she said, had landed beside her house, and from it, small creatures, which Annie later called little devils. By the way, she was kind of pressured by the townsfolk who were deeply religious to call them little devils, but she went through, she didn't know what to call them, like little men at some point, but then she just started calling them little devils to just like explain it to everybody, to relate it to a concept that people could understand. Okay, so Annie later that she called little devils came down by a ladder. She said she could somehow understand their language in her mind. Obviously today we call that telepathy. She was not willing to follow them, but she said she was taken by force, and they traveled very fast, and she saw everything in the world. She was shown space, and she was taken above the earth and between the stars. This is not somebody who's going to, this is before Star Trek. This is before the concept of UFOs. This is a long time ago, over a century ago. And so you didn't have the pop culture. So she's not using terms like, oh, we did space travel. We went to outer space. No, she's like, we went above the earth and between the stars. I just think that's cool. Okay. The machine was shining inside. Now, this is a tiny detail. She talks about how there were no sources of light in the spaceship, but everything was illuminated, which is like one of those tiny details that's extremely consistent through UFO abductions. So that's interesting. It made no noise, as in the train, she says. Annie told that the devil flew her above the earth, like I said, in between the stars. Annie was insistent and never stopped telling her story, no matter how many people thought she was weird because of it. Even though everybody said she had a fever and hallucinated or just dreamed, Annie did not disagree, and she remained insistent until she died. When the experience happened, she was middle-aged. This story is significant to me because it's before alien abductions were part of pop culture or collective consciousness. So she got a lot of little things right. Now here's an even cooler alien abduction, or alien experience, I should say. Let's go to this next one. This happened in 1639, and this was written down by John Winthrop, who was the governor of Massachusetts Bay Colony in early America. This is colonial America. On March 1st, 1639, John Winthrop made a journal entry that was absolutely bizarre. He began to recount, sorry about my dogs in the background, he began to recount a most unusual event that had recently caused a stir among the English immigrants in the colony. Winthrop wrote that earlier in the year, James Everell, a sober, discreet man, and two others had been rowing a boat in the Muddy River. I guess that's the name of a river. I've never heard of that river, which flowed through swampland and emptied into a tidal basin in the Charles River. When they saw a great light in the sky, when it stood still, it flamed up, they said. So this is a quote from them. When it stood still, it flamed up. So why do they say flamed up? They're not going to say, oh my gosh, it beamed us, it flashed us, there was this spotlight on us, because those terms didn't exist. This is 1639. So when they use lanterns, they turn the thing and the lantern wick comes up and the lantern gets way brighter. So the way that they say that they got flashed, or that something got really bright and it was like it flamed up. I love that little freaking detail. Okay. When it stood still, it flamed up, and it was about 3 yards square. End quote. The governor reported also, they said, when it ran, it was contracted into the figure of a swine. They talk about it running through the sky and it taking flight like an arrow. And I think they say when it contracted into the figure of a swine, I wonder if they mean it was cylindrical. Like they're not going to say it's round if it's in the shape of like say a tic-tac-toe or a cigar shape or something. But the way that they describe it, if it's in the shape of a swine, that to me may indicate that it was cylindrical. This light was cylindrical. And so they might be talking about a tic tac here. I'm just speculating. Okay. Over the course of 2 to 3 hours, the boatman said that the mysterious light ran as swift as an arrow. So again, running through the sky. And what does an arrow do? Super fast. It's the fastest thing. Again, like I guess maybe guns were invented, right? I don't know when guns were invented, but the thing that they related to is an arrow just zipping back and forth. Okay, darting back and forth between them and the village of Charleston, a distance of approximately 2 miles. So it's zipping back and forth between them and the village. Diverse other credible persons saw the same light after about in the same place, Winthrop added. The governor wrote that when the strange apparition finally faded away, the 3 Puritan men in the boat were stunned to find themselves 1 mile further upstream, as if the light had transported them there. The men had no memory of them rowing against the tide, although I guess it's possible. This is Jacques Vallée's commentary. He goes, although it's possible they could have been carried by the wind or a reverse tidal flow. Quote, the mysterious repositioning of the boat could suggest that they were unaware of part of their experience. Some researchers would interpret this as a possible alien abduction if it happened today. Okay, so the remember how they said when it stood still, it flamed up? A lot of people talk about, a lot of abductees anyway, talk about a light coming down somewhere close to them and standing still and then beaming them with some sort of light. And then they have, missing time or whatever. So I just think that there's like lots of little details in that story that I think are really cool. Again, there's nowhere near an alien culture. There's no concept of flying saucers and alien grays or any of that stuff. So I think this story is really cool. Now let's get into some even weirder, trippier, deeper stuff. Okay. I'm going to play a couple of little audio bites from this podcast that I love so much by Simon Bown. Okay. The first one is about after effects. People that have near-death experiences will often have after effects. These after effects include, the ability to astral project, the ability to be like clairsentient, clairvoyant, all that stuff. Psychic gifts, they're able to channel. Sometimes there are some after effects of like seeing ghosts and then that after effect fades away like after a near-death experience. So that's interesting. But the exact same thing happens after an alien abduction. So let's listen to that clip.
I talk to a lot of people that research near-death experiences and have had near-death experiences. And we've noticed that the after effects of somebody who's claimed to have been abducted by aliens are the same. Are the things that you were talking about, electrical things, catching the shadow people, kind of psychic flashes, and also amazing synchronicities. And so it's interesting that people who've had a near-death experience have those same after effects. When I talked to Whitley Strieber, he was saying sometimes at the same time the ETs were there, the dead would show up as well. People would see dead relatives, and it's such a weird connection there.
I think it's interesting too. This all kind of like connects with like astral type stuff. going back to the beginning about the guy astral projecting into the street and seeing like different entities, different people in various phases of consciousness, like wandering around. He actually ends up helping some of those people, and he becomes like a crossover specialist, and he goes to the Monroe Institute, and it's just a fascinating story. But listen to this one about aliens.
I had a guest on who was a psychic on this other podcast, and she was saying that one night she woke up, found herself standing next to her bed, and there were four of these greys at the foot of her bed. And, you know, obviously she freaked out just finding herself standing there, and she looked back at the bed and her body was still in the bed. And then she said it was like that. She was back in her body, and she quickly sat up, and the ETs weren't there. So it was almost like the ETs were in this, I don't know what you call it, like astral plane.
Okay, so I'll end it there. But here's the thing, like I remember a long time ago when I first started like getting like curious and interested in Bigfoot, in Sasquatch. I heard a lot of like the detractors and the critics say like, oh well, all the Bigfoot researchers, they eventually all just retreat to the woo, to saying that Bigfoot is some sort of mystical, non like ethereal, non physical thing, and they conveniently retreat to that position because they can't produce physical evidence because Bigfoot doesn't exist. So because Bigfoot doesn't exist, rather than admit that it doesn't exist, all these researchers are like, they retreat to this very safe, unfalsifiable position where it's just supernatural. It's just this etheric being. And that's not at all how I feel about this. I feel like if something is operating in an astral space, that in no way means that it's not physical as well. Just like a human can apparently operate in an astral space. So it's interesting. There's a lot of encounters with aliens where you leave your body. And the next podcast that I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about the most bizarre, crazy, outlandish, incredible mantis story. I'm really interested in like mantises because a lot of people say that when they see a mantis extraterrestrial, again, I don't even know if this exists. I just think it's interesting. I keep an open-minded mind, and I like to explore, you know, and I've come across tons of these mantis stories where when people see a mantis, they feel like they're looking at an angel or they feel like they're looking into the face of God. Isn't that weird? So they have this experience where they feel like it's an incredibly intelligent being. And so anyway, that's going to be in the next podcast. Again, if you have a ghost story, if you have a near-death experience, or if you have any type of weird alien stuff to tell me, please email it to ghostpantherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, look, I'm really new to the aliens and UFO space. I don't want to try and come off like I know a lot because I really am barely breaking into it. So this podcast is more of like a journey of discovery for me. I think I'm fascinated with this stuff because I'm fascinated with consciousness. And ultimately, I think all of this ends up kind of cultivating or coming back to a deeper discussion about what is human consciousness. So we'll go more into that on the next episode. But thanks for watching. I hope that this was really weird and exciting. I like talking about weird stuff like this. So this podcast is kind of supposed to be like a thing that you listen to when you're alone and you're going to sleep or whatever. Okay. All right. I'll just stop rambling. I'll see you guys on the next episode. Bye-bye.